Welcome to UU Falmouth. We're so happy tonight to have Andrew Gottlieb with us from the Association to Preserve Cape Cod. Just to give you a little bit of background about this man's cred, he has lots. It's very deep. Andrew Gottlieb has a BA from Harvard University and an MBA from Boston University. Andrew has more than 30 years of environmental, protective experience in government and elected terms in municipal office. Andrew is currently the Executive Director of the Association to Preserve Cape Cod. Andrew is on the Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel for the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station decommissioning process, for which he was recently nominated by the Speaker of the House, appointee and Vice Chair Pine Dubois. The Association to Preserve Cape Cod has expressed concern that the company responsible for the decommissioning process, Holtec International, could discharge 1 million gallons of radioactive wastewater into Cape Cod Bay. Andrew was the Executive Director of the Cape Cod Water Protection Collaborative from 2007 until January 2017. Prior to that, as Chief of the Office of Commonwealth Development, he coordinated Massachusetts energy, housing, environmental, and transportation policies. During his 16 years at the Mass Department of Environmental Protection, Andrew conceived the successful Estuaries Preservation Program and built an innovative revolving fund into the nationally recognized model for watershed protection funding. Andrew was a longtime member of the Mashpee Select Board. He has served as a Water and Sewer Commissioner, has been a board member of the Massachusetts Climate Action Network, and a trustee of Cape Cod Community College. I also wanted to send a shout out to those of you on Zoom with us. Thank you. And I just wanted to say that we have a little technical difficulty with our handheld mic, so if there are questions that you have, I will ask you to stand up and project. So without further ado, here's Andrew.
Thanks, Rosa. I'm going to cut that introduction down. It's nice to be able to talk to you all. Those of you in the audience can't see who's on the Zoom. I'm going to ask to talk about three things tonight. One is just an overall state of our waters. I'll run through very quickly some of the findings of our most recent State of the Waters report, and then also just touch base with you on issues related to the Joint Base Cape Cod, both the status of the multi-purpose machine gun range and a proposal we made about repurposing potential significant portions of the base for other purposes, and then the whole tech thing. And I'll be happy to answer questions. So, if we could put up on the state of the waters piece, we'll put up the slides in a minute. Every year for the last 4, we have been updating the status of water quality in estuaries, ponds, and public drinking water supplies. And we've been doing that utilizing almost exclusively publicly available data. The only data that we as an organization, APCC, generate is the cyanobacteria monitoring data. And the State of the Waters is intended to provide an easy place for people to go to get a quick impression of what's happening in water quality on Cape Cod. The fact that we rely on publicly available data, and yet the findings are somewhat surprising to people, is of itself sort of a encapsulation of the problems that we confront. Most people don't know what's going on with water quality, even though there's a lot of information out there. So the findings are, starting with the estuaries, and is that 90% of the estuaries on Cape Cod fail to meet water quality standards. No south-facing containment, and all but one, and only one, on the west side meet standards. So I don't know if we can get systems that fail state and federal water quality standards. And as I said, you'll see south side, none that meet standards, west side only one down near Woods Hole. And then even on the north side now, we're starting to see erosion and water quality. In the 4 years that we've been doing this analysis, we've gone from 68% of the estuaries failing to meet standards to 90. So at some point relatively soon, maybe it'll end up being 100%, maybe the handful that are in relatively good shape on the north side will stay that way as a result of the large tidal flux that they have. But in some respects, from a gross level, there isn't much room for things to get worse. So, I'll get to that. Don't steal my punchline. The place where we will continue to see degradation and worsening is in the individual stations. So what you're seeing there is an amalgamation of a series of stations spread throughout the water body. On a different slide, if you look at the report, and I would encourage you to look at this report on our website, apcc.org, you can zoom in on the estuary of concern to you. And as you magnify the image, the individual stations will start to pop up. So you can see, rather than look at the entire cape, Wacoit Bay, to pick the nearest by example. And you'll see that the further up into the estuary you go, the more red dots there are. The closer to the outlet, there's some blue dots that indicate higher water quality because they're subject to greater flushing on a daily basis with the tidal cycle. What we're seeing is, as water quality declines in these embayments, even the ones that already have problems, the areas that have good water quality are becoming smaller and smaller and limited to more and more towards the openings. So we're going to lose, even within these systems that are already impaired, we will lose the high quality waters that are remaining. So the gross level that we report every year isn't going to get much worse because it's only, another, we rate 53 abatements, so 5 are still pretty good. So 1 or 2 will go, it's not going to move the number that much, but we'll see increasing degradation within the stations. To answer the question, what's the cause? The cause is nutrients, right? This is not a classic 1970s industrial pollution, the Cuyahoga River's on fire, right? With toxic contaminants. The problem that we have in the estuaries and in the freshwater ponds is we're over-fertilizing water. And that over-fertilization is allowing algae that exist in these systems to outcompete other forms of life and are causing a series of cascading problems that are sort of negative feedback loops. They impact the resource, they make the resource weaker, they reinforce the things that make the resource weaker, and on and on and on it goes. So when you get too much nitrogen in these water bodies, it feeds algae that clouds the water. Why is that important? A couple of reasons. Eelgrass, that are the basis of the food chain, provide habitat, oxygenation, forage locations, and spawning habitat for shellfish require high amounts of sunshine. You need clear waters in order to, you're growing grass underwater to high, full sun species. Cloudy water with algae in it it's cloud cover, basically. And so you don't get sunlight down the bottom, eelgrass dies off. That which is not killed by the shading has been killed by the accumulation of the dead algae that falls to the bottom of the water pools. So if you've been around for a while, you might recall when you jumped out of the boat or walked into the shore, most of these embayments you're walking on a hard sandy bottom. Now, you're walking through muck. Well, that muck is years and years and years of accumulated, partially degraded, partially broken down dead algae that physically smothers more beneficial species and finishes the job. The cloudy water also, cloudy things, dark things, hold heat, right? So they, by presence in the water column, heat up the water body, make it more better environment for these algae to reproduce. And similarly, warmer waters carry less oxygen, it's less hospitable for a fish, finfish, shellfish. Finfish at least can perhaps swim out to areas of higher oxygen, shellfish don't. So all these things cascade on top of one another, and it's a repeat cycle that works to decline. And ultimately, the loss of the habitat that is typical of a well-functioning environmental resource such as what we used to have here in Cape Cod. Something roughly around 80% of the controllable nitrogen load is from septic system waste. The way we choose to dispose of and manage wastewater in Cape Cod is a direct result. But these results are the direct result of the fact that we don't adequately treat our wastewater. Septic systems as designed on their best day, brand new out of the box, working as it's designed, do nothing to remove nitrogen from the effluent. Nitrogen is a highly soluble element. Once it gets into the groundwater from septic systems, moves and goes to the first surface water feature that it encounters. It could go to a stream, it could go to a pond, it could go to estuary. Some limited amount of it goes directly into Nantucket Sound, Cape Cod Bay, or Buzzards Bay, but not a lot. Most of it funnels through into one of these estuarine resources where it feeds this decline. So the causes are not rocket science. It's a pretty well understood phenomenon. The solutions are somewhat complex, often expensive. We're asked things of people that people are unwilling to do to date. And as a result, we haven't seen a lot of progress in making change on the quality of our waters. In fact, despite some early efforts or recent efforts by several towns to finally get some handle on some of this, we will continue to see further declines because there's a lot of residual nitrogen in the groundwater that has not yet found its way into the estuary. So if you stopped it today, you would continue to see decline over a period of time while these systems flush themselves out. And we are a long way from stopping. So that's the bad news on the estuarine front. Go to the next slide, please. On the ponds, it is slightly less bad. How's that? And partly the reason it's slightly less bad is we know less. The estuaries are well studied. We have a database, multiple years of data, fairly rigorous testing and analysis, multi-years. Ponds, we lack a consistent deep database. So a lot of what you see here reflects about 150 odd ponds out of 900. Okay. Of the ones we monitor, year over year, about 40% of them exhibit poor water quality at some point during the summer. More often than not, that water quality decline is reflected as cyanobacteria blooms. Cyanobacteria are one of the oldest species of blue-green algae on the planet. They do and should occur in a natural healthy ecosystem, much like what we saw in the estuaries. It's when they grow out of balance in the environment that they proliferate to a degree that we see decline in the resource, but also the potential for human health impacts associated with toxicity, because certain species of cyanobacteria produce neurotoxins. In Massachusetts, there's one that's kind of sort of regulated. There are a whole bunch of them that we don't know that much about. But for the one that has been regulated, we have a program where we're monitoring ponds every 2 weeks, more frequently if we see higher levels of cyanobacteria, in a partnership with Barnstable County, where our testing indicates there might be a toxicity risk, and the sample gets taken to county health department for analysis and determination of the actual toxicity level. worried about ponds, we do have on our website a daily, the updated map starting probably the third week in May through this season. And the height of the season, Memorial Day to Labor Day, the monitoring drops off a little bit, depending on what town you're in. And we update that map every day at 7 o'clock at night. So that if you're interested in pond recreation and one of the ponds that you're interested in is one of the ones that we monitor, you can check our website on a nightly basis, get the best information that we have about what the cyano conditions are, and you can make your decisions about where you want to recreate and expose yourself, your children, and your pets to pond water. So, and we also do an e-blast system, so if you sign up for that, and anyone that's ponds exhibits a problem, you'll get a direct email. So that's all on our apcc.org website. I encourage you to take a peek at it. The 40% that show problems varies a little bit year to year. And what our interpretation of that data is that a whole bunch of ponds, maybe 60%, are marginal. And by marginal, I mean they're under stress and they're exhibiting signs of vulnerability that, given the local conditions around that pond in a given year, if things go the right way, you don't see a bloom. Things go the wrong way, you do see a bloom. What does that mean? The best operating theory we have is that the fertilizer load from residential application of fertilizers and the alteration of the nearshore buffer zone leaves these ponds vulnerable to quick infusions of nutrients associated with heavy rainfall. And one of the near-term, we're living it now, impacts of climate change is we have extended periods of drought interrupted by very heavy, short, intense rainfall events. Those short, intense rainfall events have the net effect of washing a lot of nutrients quickly into these ponds off the surface. So if your lawn guy came by and happened to fertilize, you know, the day we got a 4-inch rainstorm and you have a lawn that goes right down to the water, and your neighbor does, and there's no native vegetation between the lawn and the pond fight, a lot of that fertilizer is going to end up in the lake. And that infusion, under the right circumstances, can trigger one of these blooms. The other impact for cyanobacteria is because cyanobacteria sort of made its debut on the planet when it was really hot around here. They are really well acclimated to hot, warmer environments. Another near-term impact of climate change that we are experiencing right now is it's getting hotter out. It's hotter during the day, and more importantly, it's hotter at night. So you don't get the cooling effect at night. So these ponds are not cooling off, they're not giving off heat at night. Our friends at the Park Service monitor some of their ponds. Gull Pond in Wellfleet, if you've never been there, it's a great place. It's like going back to the 50s, very undeveloped watershed, beautiful little pond. It has cyanobacteria, and it's 6 degrees warmer in August on average now than it was 20 years ago. So if you think climate science, we're arguing about half a degree here and there. 6 is a lot, right? So if you're trying to get a plant to grow at home, what do? You feed it and you put it in a warm environment. And that's basically what we've done to our lakes, which is why we're seeing the cyanobacteria. So as we learn more, we'll learn more about what the actual distribution of problems are in the freshwater environment. Freshwater environment, and cyanobacteria in particular, driven a little bit more by phosphorus than by nitrogen, although there is more of a correlation between the two in the freshwater environment than we see in the marine side, and we don't fully understand it yet. Phosphorus is different than nitrogen, it's less water soluble, it binds to soil particles, so it moves differently, and therefore some of the techniques to manage it are a little bit different. The other part of the phosphorus puzzle is that a lot of just like in the marine side, you get all this algae in the water column that dies every fall, the water clears up, settles to the bottom. All that algae has a high phosphorus load associated with it. In properly oxygenated waters, the soil, the sediment particles hold the phosphorus. In anoxic poor environments, like we're starting to see more and more in these ponds, there's a chemical reaction that releases phosphorus from the sediments, and it goes back up into the water column and feeds another bloom that then accumulates, drops down in the fall, and builds that soil, that sediment base higher and higher. Managing the control of those bottom waters is a real challenge, and nobody has a great handle on yet. There's chemical treatments like alum that are popular in some places. We don't love it as an organization. We see it sometimes as a useful stopgap while you're controlling source loads, but as a long-term solution, don't love it. Other towns, Orleans is running an interesting pilot, introducing oxygen to the lower levels of some of their ponds through nanobubble technology to see if they can keep those bottom layers oxygenated and keep the phosphorus on the bottom. Some promising results, a little too early to tell, hard to know how to scale that up, but it's offering some prospects of a different way of thinking about the issue. So lakes are a challenge. Lakes have not gotten the level of attention that the estuarine resources have, for a lot of good reasons, some bad reasons. So we're playing catch up with that. The county has initiated a 3-year study to try to improve our level of understanding of freshwater environments, called the Freshwater Initiative. Full disclosure, we, APCC, were selected after a competitive bid process to do the sampling program associated with the Freshwater Initiative. So we're doing fairly detailed 7-month April to November sampling in 50 ponds that we kicked off last month, that we hope will give us a better understanding at a high level of the nature of how we can categorize different ponds, trying to understand which ones are driven by external loading of nutrients, which ones are driven by internal loading of nutrients, and to come up with some ways to characterize them without a whole ton of expensive investigative work, so that we can begin the management process. And what we suggest people to do about pond management, water quality, may vary depending on if you're externally load driven or internally load driven. That said, in all cases, fresh or salt, it makes good sense to eliminate whatever portion of the nutrient load you can eliminate fast, effectively, and cheaply. So, don't fertilize your lawns. Don't hire your lawn guy to fertilize your lawns. It's the easiest thing you can do. It's cheaper for you, and you'll have a healthier environment as a result. That's just a starting point. Next one, please. And then on the public water supply, this to not be a complete downer. Public water supply picture is a lot better. There are 20 public water supplies serving 15 towns of Cape Cod. You ponder the math on that. 20.
For 15 towns?
Yes. The town of Barnstable has 4 separate public water supplier entities serving its residents. Just for starters. Of the 20, 16 had excellent water quality that met all state and federal drinking water standards. And argue about the merit of the standard. I'm not here to do that tonight. The standard is what the standard is. If they met the standard, they got a gold star. Right? 2 got a good rating, 2 got poor. The 2 that got poor, National Guard base, had a bacterial contamination problem that required boil water order. Town of Yarmouth had a bacteria problem and a PFAS problem in their finished water, which is really unusual. 2 towns had good standards that had some initial concerns about some bacteria that were forced to retesting that ended up revealing there was no public health problem. So from that perspective, the delivery of public water supply is pretty good. That said, 10 of the 20 detected PFAS compounds in their water below public health standards. So there's a line of argument out there that any PFAS is too much PFAS. In fact, it's below the standard isn't good enough. I'm not going to debate that tonight. The indications are that PFAS this is not a newsflash, fairly ubiquitous in the environment and fairly ubiquitous in the groundwater, and therefore it's in our water supplies. What we don't know, because we don't measure it, is what's the prevalence of PFAS in private wells. Because, you know, we're all dipping from the same straw, and so there's no reason to think private wells are immune from PFAS existence. So PFAS is for those that aren't aware of it, a class of chemicals of which I forget, 16,000 of them roughly. They are, you know, synthetic chemicals, carbon-based. They provide all the non-stick features, waterproofing features, stain-resistant features that everybody loves in their consumer products. It's the stuff that keeps the food from sticking to the inside of the can, the food you eat. It's the stuff that keeps your carpet clean. It's the stuff that makes your Gore-Tex keep you from getting wet. It's everywhere. It's in everything. And it is in, if you're a typical crowd, and we took blood from you, 90% of it. It is extremely stable. It has the name Forever Chemicals. So think about it. The primary first use was Teflon. So really heat resistant. Really hard to get rid of. It's really easy to take out of water. It's very easy to treat using basically a big fish filter, a carbon filter. Then you have a lot of PFAS laden carbon filter you got to figure out what to do with it. But it's not technologically complex to take it out of water. It's really hard to break it down. So once it's in the environment, it sticks around for a really long time. And the way we regulate in this country is actually kind of stupid. We put something in the environment, we notice if it might cause a problem or not, and then we fight about whether there's a regulatory standard for it, and then we spend a lot of money trying to clean it up. And while Massachusetts is ahead of the game of most states, we regulate 6 PFAS compounds in drinking water to an aggregate number of a combination of any of the 6 of them above a certain number. You have to shut down the water supply. I mentioned there are 16,000 of them. So if you say, company X that's making them, you can't produce PFAS number 527 because it's illegal, they can move one molecule to the left or right, it's a new chemical, and it's not regulated. Which is why we have 16,000. So they stopped making Teflon, now they make next gen. Probably has the same overall generic health effects, environmental effects as what Teflon does. So we're way behind on the regulation of those. EPA came out with a new public health standard down to 0 for the 6, but that leaves 15,994 that aren't particularly well regulated. Mashpee lost a well. Falmouth lost a well, both for firefighting foam activity from the base. Base is paying for Mashpee $8.5 million to restore that one well. I don't know what they're paying Falmouth to restore their well, but if you do the math, you know, most water suppliers have 4, 5, 6 sources, times 20, times $8.5 million, big number. So it's an emerging, I don't even call it an emerging issue right now, but it's an issue of growing concern. To sum up all this, with that little bit of sour news around water supplies, there's an important public policy point to be made here, which is that we have, relatively speaking, high quality drinking water in Cape Cod. We have, objectively speaking, horrible surface water quality in Cape Cod on fresh waters and our marine environment. Why the difference? To my mind, it's simple. In the 70s and 80s, it was a generally well accepted public policy consensus that protecting current and future sources of drinking water was a valid and appropriate use of municipal government powers. Towns bought land, identified well sites, implemented wellhead protection zoning that restricted the most hazardous land uses away from public water supply wells. So where we manage to an objective, and there are exceptions, but as a general rule, where we manage to an objective of high quality waters, we maintain it. And that's reflected in the map I just showed you. For surface waters, we did none of that. We actually intensified the threatening land uses, relied on a waste disposal approach that had the maximum potential damage to the resource. And the result is, if you thought about it, what you would have expected. And unraveling why we are where we are in that arc. We didn't protect, we didn't prioritize, we didn't protect, we didn't understand the hydrologic cycle associated with these resources, and we just pretended like, despite decades ago, having pretty clear indications that these waters were under stress, we just barely kept barreling along, throwing your peanut poop in the backyard and a hole in the ground, and expecting the resource to be able to continue to accept the insult. And the resources have told us pretty consistently over the last 20 or 30 years, we've had enough. Now it's up to us to figure out what to do about it. So that's the status on the water supplies, the water side. Let me just quickly talk a little bit about the set of associated regulations that DEP has proposed. If you were paying attention, and even if you weren't, DEP proposed a set of modifications to the rules governing septic systems back late last year. The rules governing septic systems date back to 1994, and they established an environmental code that is implemented by the town health agents and govern the installation of septic systems in individual homes and businesses, and systems that use less than 10,000 gallons a day. And compliance with that code assures you of worsening water quality. Every single septic system that goes in the ground makes things worse. Doesn't mean your system's failing. Doesn't mean you haven't maintained it well. Your system can operate as designed. It doesn't take nitrogen or phosphorus in any meaningful way out of the waste stream. Septic systems were designed for one reason only, that is to protect humans from exposure to pathogens on the surface. You know, we've all had some experience probably, certainly in the old days of cesspools. Don't go to that part of the yard, it's wet, right? That's because the septic system cesspool was failing and you had, breakout onto the surface of effluent laden with, among other things, bacteria. Septic system designed to prevent that from happening. They introduced, by design, poorly treated effluent into the groundwater in a very efficient manner. Because they don't take out nitrogen, our environmental systems have been overloaded. And the DEP has known this for a long time. Full disclosure, I worked at DEP for 18 years. I was at DEP when we wrote Title V Code in 1994. Changing it was hard. Changing it from what it was pre-94 to what it became in 94 was really hard. It's a statewide initiative, and basically it seems absurd now. The argument was over whether cesspools were okay or not. Now we know a lot more. And DEP has proposed a set of regulation revisions that seek to upgrade the standards of septic systems for new construction, renovation, replacement, and, under certain circumstances, replacement of existing functioning systems with nitrogen-reducing alternative systems. That part, if you pay a little bit of attention, you probably know. The part you probably don't know, because a lot of towns didn't want to talk about it because they wanted to scare you with the first part without telling you about the second part, was a set of regulations called watershed permit regs that laid out a basis upon which towns could get a 20-year permit that allowed them to implement a phased approach to resolving their wastewater load nitrogen problem based on a plan that they develop that reflects their community's individual priorities and approaches. So if you were a town like Chatham that has said 10 years ago, we plan to sewer the whole town because we want it. We don't have to sewer the whole town to meet the nitrogen load, but that's what we want to do. That's our plan. If you're Chatham, you get a watershed permit that says that's your plan. If you're Mashpee and you want to do, 60% of your load reduction through some sewer systems and the rest through shellfish aquaculture, you can get a permit to do that. If you, and you can go down the list. There's 15 towns and there's probably 17 different approaches to how they want to manage their loads in combination of stuff. If you get that permit as a town under these draft regulations, the requirement that your individual homeowner replace their septic system in 5 years that's got everybody's undies on fire, that goes away. So the two regulation packages taken together give towns all the control on what experience occurs to their individual residents. It was designed to encourage and incentivize homeowners to get their town into a binding 20-year schedule to solve their water quality problems. It was designed and intended to put pressure, citizen pressure, on recalcitrant municipal officials to get them off the dime, to stop behaving like the choice of dealing with their wastewater problem was actually a choice at all. So guess what? When you put pressure on somebody, they push back. So you had a number of towns, not all of them, number of towns distort and what's on the table. Talk about half of it, the part that's perceived to be punitive to the resident, without talking about the part that says, I, as a municipal official acting in concert with you as voters, have the ability to change that scary future I've drawn for you. So it's been a very contentious regulatory process. Some towns have been great about it. Town of Barnstable, Town of Eastham, Town of Wellfleet wrote really thoughtful comments on the regs. We support, to paraphrase, we support municipal scale intervention in these issues. We have specific questions about how you implement that, how you do this, and the timing is here. All perfectly legitimate ones. A bunch of other towns wrote it and said, this is horrible, you can't make us do this. It's too fast. We've known about this since the 80s, but we can't be expected to solve this before 2050. That's just unreasonable. And we as an organization have given our full support to the DEP approach as proposed. It is a quantum leap forward. Is it perfect? No. Nothing's perfect. But it's better. It's a hell of a lot better than what we've got. So the regs are under consideration and are being amended to reflect the voluminous public comment that they got. It's got a lot of comment. It's my understanding that the administration intends to proceed and promulgate these regs. They settled they have agreed to a court action schedule that has them promulgating for on or around by the 1st of July. So there's a public indication. I don't have any inside information. I just know what the court settlement said. There's a good public indication that they're going to promulgate something. I don't know what they're going to promulgate. I don't know how they handle the public records or the public comments that they received. So I don't know what the final shape of it's going to look like. So big issue for all of us. Follow it if you want. We write about it a lot on our website, apcc.org. To the extent we know anything about it, we'll share it. So it's good. We're a good source of information on it. My bias is I support the regs. I haven't heard a good alternative or a good rationale why we should go back to a code we know is the source of pollution. All things based. So two big things going on in the base. One is the proposed machine gun range that the National Guard has been pursuing for longer than any of us in this room knew it, that they had done their own environmental analysis, put it out for public comment, got over 1,000 public comments, saw merit in this minute. So the draft, from draft to final after public comment, the number of changes in response to public comment were 0. 0. Not one thing that any one of us said was deemed by the guard to be sufficiently meritorious or concerning to warrant one solitary word change. Okay? They then sent it down to DC, the National Guard headquarters. They said, looks good to us. Approved it. We've been fighting this thing for a couple of years. We have concerns that the sheer volume of munitions on that site is a real threat to the Upper Cape Water Supply Reserve Area, which provides drinking water recharge to Sandwich, Falmouth, Mashpee, Bourne, and Barnstable.
100%.
Huh?
It's 100% of our water.
Yes. We believe that the clear cutting of 170 acres of forested land is a bad climate move, losing carbon sequestration of that natural forest, cooling associated with that natural forest, and we think the process stunk. EPA initiated a review 18 months or so ago under their authority under the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act, allowed them to look at this project from an expenditure of federal funds perspective and its potential impact on the sole source aquifer, of which there are not many, and we are one. They issued a draft finding 2 weeks ago that, lo and behold, when somebody other than the project proponent looked at the data, determined that in fact a lot of what we were all saying was in fact true, and that the range as proposed represented a significant threat to the public health and quality of the public drinking water supply. That determination was the first of its sort made by EPA Region 1 New England and one of very few anywhere nationally. It's a big deal. That draft opinion goes out for public comment in a real public comment process that closes between now and June 24th. There's a public hearing, I believe, the 24th of May in Sandwich at their new Senior Life Activity Facility at Meeting House Road and Couture Road. I would encourage, and we will be encouraging people and providing information on our website on how you can engage in this public comment process. EPA is taking the public comment process seriously, so it's worth your time. They listen, and they deserve an enormous amount of credit because going to the guard, telling them no, is not an easy thing to do. So if you're concerned about our drinking water quality, you owe it to yourself, anybody you care about, to take the time to participate in this process. We will make it easy for you. We'll build links, we'll provide you access to the information. You can find the report and all the underlying analysis they did already on our website. If you want to start digging into it, we'll be distilling some of it so you'll be able to more easily extract from the voluminous analysis that they did key points that might resonate with you so you can convey them. This is an important milestone. In fact, this is not over. It's not like there's been some epiphany of self-awareness on the guard's part saying, oh, we got it wrong. Everything I've heard from them, and they don't talk to me, everything I've heard from them is, we think we were right and we're going to try and push this forward. So they're not going to go down quietly into the night. But for the first time since this whole process surfaced, public interest has the upper hand. Don't waste it. All right? That's the deal on the range. The other thing I want to talk about the base is that, and this is no laughing matter, there's sort of a national tragedy of the leak of confidential information, especially around the war in Ukraine, that originated out of the base. This is not to take any pleasure in that. The reality is that the Air Force has suspended intelligence mission at the base. We didn't, nobody else did. The military itself that function from the base. The intelligence mission was the primary mission associated with the Joint Base post-base closure process that happened in the early 2000s. We have written to the governor and said that now, given that the primary mission and purpose of the base is no longer the primary purpose and mission of the base, maybe it'll be permanent, maybe it won't, I don't know. It's a really good time to rethink the highest and best uses of that property. And specifically what we suggested is there are two, KCOG has a lot of priorities, but there are two of the highest order. One is preservation and protection of our drinking water. The other is finding a way to make a meaningful dent in the shortage of affordable housing that supports long-term residents of the Cape and the workforce that's needed to make our economy work. We've encouraged the governor to look at how the remaining priority uses for that military base, in particular the Coast Guard, can be accommodated while the disturbed areas, particularly in the southern portion, that used to be used for housing and other when there were more people on the base, how that could be redeveloped into a large-scale mixed-use affordable housing center that would make a meaningful dent in the availability of housing, and to look at it from the perspective of how can you do this and have it be climate friendly? How do you base it on renewables, large-scale solar, already disturbed areas, you don't have to clear forest, the use of anaerobic digestion associated with wastewater treatment, that you can use the waste heat to cool and heat the buildings, minimize or eliminate discharge of waste. There's a whole way to envision a different kind of community that meets a whole range of needs that we have on the Cape that can't be met anywhere else. Pair that with the imposition and implementation of permanent, lasting, and meaningful restrictions on the 15,000 contiguous acres of forest that make up the Upper Cape Water Supply Reserve, and you have the ability through one action to continue to accommodate critical military needs on site, make a meaningful dent in the housing, and provide protection of the largest non-public park service National Seashore portion of contiguous forest left on Cape Cod. It's a generational opportunity to maximize the use of an asset that is grossly underutilized on its best day, and it's a source of ongoing contamination activities that are adding to, not benefiting, our water quality challenges. And I wait to hear back from the governor. The final thing I want to touch on is the nuclear decommissioning activities up in Pilgrim. Governor Baker appointed me as his representative before he left office to nuclear commissioning, I forget the name, nuclear decommissioning advisory panel. And in the process of participating in that group, it's one of the most difficult public body groups I've ever participated in. There's a wide range of perspectives among the committee members, not an enormous amount of respect between the committee members. The public were really engaged and were really pissed off. So they're very difficult meetings. Ultec, which is the multinational that was awarded the contract to decommission the facility, and in doing so was handed in excess of $500 million of public funds to do the work. So they're not putting their own capital in. They are utilizing access to a fund that you all contributed to. Every time you paid your electric bill, there was a decommissioning fund surcharge on your bill. There has been for decades. It all went into a fund that was being set aside to pay for this thing. So when they talk about saving money and cost effect, what they mean is they are trying to maximize how much of that public fund is left over at the end of the decommissioning process, because that's their take-home pay. Okay? So they have chosen to discharge $1.1 million 1.1 million gallons of radioactive contaminated wastewater from the facility into Cape Cod Bay. Why? Not because it's the only option available to them, but because it's the cheapest one. Why is it the cheapest one? Well, that facility, since 1971, has been exchanging water back and forth with Cape Cod Bay to cool the power production facility. They have the pipes, the pumps, and the discharge location. All they need to do is open the valve, turn on the pump, flush the water out of the bay, and they're done. Basically costs them nothing. So their disposal cost goes to zero, which means good for them, bad for us. They have 3 other options, and none of them are great, because there is no good answer to disposal of nuclear waste. Because one of the problems with the nuclear waste industry is nobody ever figured out what you're going to do with the stuff when you're done with it. So the options are they can evaporate it, use the atmosphere as the diluter, so we all get to breathe it. They can ship it someplace else, and I don't know where that is. Find some poor downtrodden community in the Midwest or West that's willing to take our trash, and like most of the other trash we send out, they can deal with it. It's their problem. Or they can store it on site and wait for some answer on what's the right way to deal with this stuff. They're already storing the spent nuclear fuel rods that created the reactions in the chamber. There's 86 of them. They're standing in 86, there's 86 containment structures, each one of which, probably put 4 of them in this room. Okay, they're big. They're sitting up on the hill, overlooking the bay. It's a really nice spot. On a good day with the wind in my back, I could take a football and huck it into the bay from where these things sit. It's better than where they used to sit, which was about 6 inches above sea level on the edge of the shore. So you could build a 1 million gallon storage tank, put them up on the hill, and wait until somebody figures out what to do with this stuff. We have opposed the use of the bay as the discharge location. Don't feel any obligation to tell them how to solve the problem, other than they can't use Cape Cod Bay to do it. The story's complicated in that all things radioactive are preempted by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So state and federal laws that pertain to disposal of nuclear waste are overridden by NRC authority. The NRC sees no issue and has allowed Holtec and other decommissioning facilities to discharge radioactive wastewater into marine waters, into tidal waters, as a matter of business. They don't see a problem. They've already got the NRC's okay. What they don't have is a valid permit from the state or federal government that allows this discharge of the non-nuclear components of this water. So they've finally agreed that they need a permit for that. So they've applied for that permit, state permit and the federal permit. And the expectation is that when you set the radioactivity apart, you look at what is in this water, that they can probably treat it down to meet the state and federal water quality standards. And from their perspective, good to go, get a permit. We as an organization did something that's fairly atypical for us. We are lawyers. We don't tend to litigate. It's not our MO. But every now and then, we need to litigate. So we hired some really good lawyers with the intention of going into court and seeking injunctive relief to prevent the discharge. As we worked on it, we decided not the most productive and likely successful path. So we changed strategies, and we, in February, wrote an 11-page treatise to the governor and her staff outlining a state law basis under something called the Ocean Sanctuaries Act that we believe provides the basis upon which not only can they deny the application, but that they are required to deny the application. And the only mental gymnastics you have to do, and it ain't much, is to acknowledge the fact that the Ocean Sanctuaries Act prohibits any new industrial wastewater discharge into ocean sanctuaries, of which Cape Cod Bay is one. There are exceptions. Exceptions are typically based around existing grandfathered activities. Holtec's argument is we were discharging in 1971 when the law passed, we're grandfathered. Except, here's the thing you gotta acknowledge, except the discharge that they were engaged in when the ocean sanctuaries passed and for which they are permitted was the use of Cape Cod Bay water for the discharge of cooling water associated with the production of power at that facility. Power production stopped in 2019. That stoppage extinguished their grandfathered status. What they want to do now is discharge some accumulated water, a combination of industrial processed water and stormwater on site that they currently use, oddly enough, to protect their workers from exposure to radiation while they decommission. It's fundamentally separate and distinct from their grandfathered activity, therefore it does not fall into the exemption. Without the exemption, there is no authority for the state to issue them a permit. That's the argument, and it's a really good one. We met with the administration, presented the argument. I don't know what they're going to do with it. They haven't told us. I will tell you this. We felt as good about the merits of the argument going into the meeting as we did walking out of the meeting. And we're going to be pressuring the governor to call an early close to this process to notify Holtec that they are not eligible for the permits for which they seek, that there's no basis upon which their permit application should be considered, and spare us all the torturous process of going through a permit application process that should end up in a no. And if Holtec's going to sue them at the end, they might as well sue them now. So we'll see. It's an important issue for the region. An important issue both from an environmental perspective, because nobody's in a really good position to really define what the impacts of low-level radioactive waste contamination distributed into the bay will be. It's undeniably an enormous reputational harm to the region. So if you're a consumer, you have a choice between buying fish, shellfish, anything harvested from waters that you know are dosed with radioactivity versus ones that were dosed not. Where are you going to buy them? You can choose a beachfront house to rent for 2 weeks on a beach that received radioactive wastewater dose 2 weeks before you put your kids in the water, or you can go someplace that's not. Where are you going to go? And so on, and so on, and so on. The reputational harm is significant, it's real, it's really hard to quantify, and I don't want to have that fight. The beauty of the Ocean Sanctuaries Act interpretation is as a blanket prohibition, the legislature has determined in advance that the discharge is harmful and not allowed. We, as participants in the process on behalf of the public, have to make no finding of harm, have to demonstrate no environmental damage, have to demonstrate or quantify no reputational harm, nor for the Commonwealth to exercise authority. They blanket, no. We wait. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. I just got the music starting to play.
Do we have any questions? Andrew, you've given us so much information, and we have a lot of questions that will be coming up on Zoom, but there are people here that I feel we also need to address. Can we take a few questions? If you have them, can you stand up and project? Kathy.
You just want me to talk loudly?
That'd be great.
I would like to know if the thing you said that people could do, but they won't, does that have to do with those toilets? We had someone come here and talk about that.
So my personal bias. So before I got to doing this work, I worked in what's called in the event of water shortage and you ask people to change their behavior in response to crisis, they will do it for a short period of time. And then they go back to their norm. The changes in behavior, or changes in technology, changes in, in this case, in this example, water use, that are built into the system. We went from 1986 in Massachusetts, you put a toilet in, you use 7.5 gallons of water, now it's 1.8. The durable changes come from changes in technology that don't rely on human change in behavior. I personally have a fairly skeptical view of people's willingness to change their behavior and habits, either for the benefit of the environment, for the benefit of their kids, for the benefit of the neighbor, and even for the benefit of themselves. And so, while nothing's perfect, progress steps that can be made. We ask people all the time, maintain your septic system. Most don't. We ask them not to fertilize their lawns because there's alternatives out there. Change the planting mix. Most don't. We ask them not to spray pesticides and insecticides on their property. Most continue to do so, despite overwhelming evidence that is bad for everything. And so, what you hear embedded in my comments is a bias, right or wrong, that's mine, towards, processes and changes that work and function without the goodwill and ongoing work of the individual. And that's maybe not the greatest statement on my view on human nature, but that's kind of where I'm at right now. I don't see an answer, a broad-scale answer in our wastewater problem in particular, that is reliant on massive changes in people's behavior. I think there's a lack of self-awareness among the populace. There's a lack of willingness to make even the slightest change in lifestyle or behavior to benefit water quality, climate, landscape, and the like. So if you picked up from what I was saying, a reluctance to, rely on abatement techniques that are dependent on the reliable, persistent, widespread change of behavior of the people who live down here, then you're certainly right.
Can I just comment? I think it goes beyond behavior. I think it's the economics of it. I mean, the economics of those new systems for water-based treatment is, just like the heat pump systems, it's very costly to, particularly people with limited incomes. So I think there's an economic factor that has to be considered here beyond the behavior. I mean, I can understand there's stop using pesticides and all that. That's a simple solution.
You live in Falmouth, so let me tell you what other towns have experienced, because it's not the same. Town of Mashpee, $54 million wastewater infrastructure investment 2 years ago, $12 million Monday night, not a peep. Town of Yarmouth, last Tuesday night, $207 million wastewater infrastructure investment, unanimous. Neither project resulted in one dime of increased property taxes on the residents. Not a nickel.
But how does Falmouth hook up to the system?
There's answers to those things. And what the problem is that not enough towns are talking about that. If you, let's say you're town X on Cape, and you want to build, municipal wastewater treatment plant and sewer 1,000 homes. And your town X, your town Y, somewhere else over the bridge. Same system, same number of people. It is vastly cheaper to build that system on Cape Cod because we have access to money and subsidy levels that are not available to other communities in Massachusetts. We've got zero interest loans that are available to us. We've got 25% principal forgiveness under the Cape and Islands Water Protection Trust Fund. We've got the hotel motel state tax, local share revenue. We've got the ability to do water infrastructure fund And in addition to that, we have a sliding scale septic management program, loan program out of Barnstable County that APCC is urging went from being a 5% interest charge to all the way down to 0. That provides no interest loans for people who are at or below 120% of the area median income, 2% loans to people who are between 120% and 180% of area median income. It covers both septic system upgrades and sewer connections, paid out over 30 years with no credit checks required. And there's legislation out there that will provide additional levels of subsidy for principal forgiveness for people who get those 0 and 2% loans. It's not nothing to incur those costs, but there are real, significant, and meaningful sources of assistance to homeowners that all our towns have not done as good a job as they could, letting their residents know how those impacts can be mitigated. So there are always exceptions to the rule, there are always going to be problems with that, but there's substantial monies available that are not available to anybody else outside of Cape Cod.
Give the microphone to this man, please.
At one time, it was stated that for Falmouth to be completely sewered would cost $500 million. Now, you've had business training as I have had, but you're looking for how much benefit you can get for how much money. A place like Seacoast Shores makes sense to sewer, and I think there's some talking about doing that kind of thing in here. But there's also, as you look around this area, there's much more distributed housing in terms of number of residents per square mile, whatever you want to do. How can you take septic systems that have nitrogen coming into it and precipitate that nitrogen out so it will remain in the septic tank, so when you pump your tank, that some of that nitrogen will come out? I mean, I don't know the chemical compound that you have, but has somebody looked at making a precipitate out of that nitrogen?
So if you're in the septic world, and I'm not a chemist, and
I'm not a chemist either, I'm an engineer.
So the technology focused around nitrogen septic tanks is actually focused around turning the nitrogen into a gaseous phase and having it off gas out, not holding it in the tank. The research around phosphorus is more along the lines of what he suggested, which is finding ways to just precipitate that out, capture it in the tank so it doesn't move. There's some different technologies. There's not a lot of progress been made on the phosphorus side with septics. And the nitrogen stuff is better, but there's not a single Title V related nitrogen control system that's good enough to be a substitute for and create an absence of some other control technology.
New Hampshire, you can't sell dishwasher detergent with nitrogen in it. I know we used to have a house on the lake in New Hampshire.
Phosphorus.
Phosphorus, yeah.
You can't in Massachusetts either.
Okay, so where does the other phosphorus come from?
You.
So we produce phosphorus in
No, you eat phosphorus.
yeah. Okay.
You excrete it.
Okay. Joe Apicella, I happen to know in Seacoast Shores, he had wood chips put in where he would not drain into the Eel River.
Yeah.
As a modification to a septic system. Is that a good
We don't know.
remedy?
We don't know. I mean, there's good work being done at the test center that looks at a whole bunch of black box carbon absorption systems that hold phosphorus or nitrogen. I'm sorry. And what we don't know yet is, they're showing some good signs, but for how long will they last? What's the cost basis for evaluating them? One of the really attractive, I think misleading parts of this discussion is people tend to look at, I can put an IA system in, even if it's expensive, say it's gonna cost me 40 grand, right? Compared to, I'm making up numbers, $90,000 for the cost of a sewer to the same home. Well, obviously what's lost in that conversation is the life cycle. So if most septic systems are designed for a 20-year life, a lot of them last longer, a lot of them stay in the ground longer, but they're not working very well. If you have to replace these alternative systems 2 or 3 times during the same life cycle period, for which you're evaluating that initial $90,000, it's not first cost, least cost, it's what the overall cost of the system is. And it's not abundantly clear to me that in a lot of instances, the people that are throwing around this idea that IAs are cheaper are looking at anything other than the initial installation. And I don't think it's an honest apples to apples comparison.
What you're talking about is the permeable reactive barriers, and they just had a presentation a month or so ago at Wacoit Bay, and they said that in the last 10 to 15 years, you're going to have to dig it all up and replace it.
Well, the other thing is replacing a lot, the initial iterations of those were big wood chip trenches, because it's actually a technology that's in use for years in hazardous waste cleanup. What's been piloted and showing more signs of benefit and much easier to install is the injection of vegetable oils, liquid carbon sources into the groundwater. And so people are trying to figure out, because you don't have to do, you're poking a bunch of holes in the ground, pushing that stuff in, as opposed to trenching along the water, which has, big wetland implications. It's also, you're destroying the region, a little like Vietnam, destroying it to save it, right? So you have to dig up all these wetland areas to put in a bunch of wood chips underneath them so that the wetlands are protected, but you've destroyed it in the process. What have you really accomplished?
We get one more question, this gentleman's
Your turn.
waiting.
I have a short comment and a small question. Regarding economics, the word I always think of is something called underwater. And that means that you have an investment, you have a house, you have a mortgage, it's worth something, and then the bottom falls out. Nobody wants to buy it, nobody wants to rent it, nobody wants to live there. The economy goes south, and you owe the bank more than it's worth. And I think that's something that's facing all of us, even though it'll be tough to pay these bills. As Mr. Gottlieb points out, there are ways to pay the bills, and if we don't pay the bills, we'll be underwater and stuck. We will be holding Cape Cod, but nobody else will value it, and the economics of it will be terrible. So that was my comment. The question is a little sillier, but you brought up something that I never thought of before. You mentioned oxygenation, and I know in Santuit Pond, they've had at least a little bit of success with what some of us call the water bugs. These solar gadgets that pump air down to the pond. And when you mentioned it, I thought of something. I have friends in other locations that run marinas or have boats there, and they bubble them in the wintertime. They have little compressors. I understand there's regulations and permits and things that happen. But if it was feasible for people along the water to put bubblers into the ponds, like friends in the marinas do, and run low-level air into the ponds and bubble like the water bugs do, would that potentially be helpful?
Probably not. I think, you need to, so the things your water bugs are called solar bees. And they're circulators, and they attempt to keep the upper layers of the water oxygenated so that you don't get that, anaerobic setting. I am really, as it applies to Santuit, really down on those. Santuit has, I said there's variability in our ponds. Yeah. One place there isn't variability is Santuit. It's toxic on and off from May through the cold weather, year in and year out, with the solar bees. If anything, I think the solar bees have served as a crutch to the people who don't want to do anything real on that pond. Say, oh, the solar bees are working. Oh, but you can't go in the water 7 months of the year. Tell me why they're working. Maybe they're making it, instead of being, 98% horrible, maybe they're making them 97% horrible. Well, the place is a disaster. So the reality is, some of those things, there's a lot of reasons why people want to say no to the management technique that forces them to do something different. To not fertilize their lawn, to not use their high-powered motorboat in a body of water that's 10 feet deep, or,
7 places.
or, upgrade take their cesspool that's sitting in the groundwater out doing something different because, oh, we're gonna rely on the solar bead, or, oh, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. So, that one really actually, more than any other example you come up with, actually bugs me the most because it's this false crutch that lets people pretend like they're doing something. In terms of the bubbling thing, I think the more, the example you gave is, a little crude, because, part of the reason those bubblers work, they're not even bubblers, they're just water streams. They're sump pumps that just move a lot of water around, keep the ice from forming. So they're intended to be disruptive, right? And really what you want is, if you're going to introduce, and that's what the pilot program is doing in Orleans, you're going to introduce oxygen, you want to do it at depth, not on the shoreline, but you want to do it at depth. And you want to have really fine bubbles, so you're not disturbing the rest of that ecosystem. So a large-scale circulating pump, might make some difference, but it's going to cause all sorts of trouble for all sorts of other benthic species.
I'm not somebody who's going to invest this into a lawn, but I know they had some of those gadgets. Somebody looked at them and they added more. And you asked all of us to look for incremental changes. You suggesting that there might be some help in this, not a complete solution. But you also mentioned we should fertilize, we shouldn't spray pesticides. In that spirit of doing lots of things, even if they just make 5 or 10 or 15% different, I thought it was maybe an okay question.
It is an okay question because it provokes a worthwhile conversation. Fact is, a whole bunch of little things will add up. The truth of the matter is, especially with the estuaries, you can do all the little stuff, all of it. In the absence of dealing with the septic load problem, you won't see the water quality come back. So we should absolutely do all the little stuff, but we can't use doing the little stuff as an excuse not to take on the big things. And there are people out there in every town who will use the well-intentioned ideas of others to make incremental progress as an excuse not to do the big thing, because they want to get out of Dodge before the bill comes due.
John McWilliams has a question for you.
One of the issues that I have with what you're saying, and I thank you very much for coming and really informing us. We have on Cape Cod a whole industry of maintenance of grounds by the industry. I mean, and our places look like we're in the suburbs, someplace around Boston most of the time. How do you change that mentality, and how do you work with lawn maintenance groups so they don't use fertilizers? They are planting trees rather than taking them out. How do you turn that around? It seems to me once you start that, then you have having them, because they're giving the advice to homeowners, particularly off the Cape.
Yep.
I mean, they want their houses to come back and look exactly like they looked when they left in the fall. The spring, I mean, everything looks exactly the same.
Yep. So, short answer to your question is, I don't know. We've done a bunch of stuff. If you look at our web, we do a lot on our website and talks and program, and there's some material outside. I forgot to mention there's material on the State of the Waters report and on landscaping and on forest cover loss and habitat impacts. I would encourage you to take with you. They all link back to reports that are on our website. We promote a lot people moving to what we call Cape Cod lawns. Combination of some turf grass, moss, clover. Doesn't require fertilizers, doesn't require watering. So that's part of it. We do a ton to promote native species plantings, but there's always more. We're rolling out some new programs. We're going to do some consultancies to people now on a minor fee basis. We'll go to your house and give you suggestions on how to upgrade environmental performance of your particular yard. So some of it's just, leading by example. People see that, our yard in our office, we bought an old farmhouse, classic suburban landscape. Privet edges, yews, it's dreadful. If you look at it now, we converted it over to a native landscape. We've got a rain garden, we've got, all native species. It's a great garden. Looks beautiful, sounds great, a lot of life. I get emails from people, I got one last year, saying, are you guys in financial trouble because it doesn't look like you have the money to maintain it? Right? And I'm pretty sure I knew who it was. And the guy whose house it was denuded of anything other than one tree in the middle of the yard and was a putting green. So we had a lovely exchange. It's education, and education's endless. The industry doesn't like us much. We have supported home rule petitions by Nantucket, out of our turf, but we're doing it anyway. Orleans, and then Harwich has one on their town meeting. When was it tonight or last night? Lost track. It's Wednesday, right? So I think they did it last night, or not went, to ban the sale and use of fertilizers and pesticides. Not because it's ever going to happen, but because, much like the NRC has preempted state and federal authorities to regulate nuclear waste, the state of Massachusetts preempted the ability of municipalities to regulate fertilizers and pesticides at statewide level. So we're supporting enough towns putting home rule petitions into the legislature that we create enough of a critical mass that we can get people to the table and have a conversation about regulatory standards that reflect the hydrogeologic needs and realities of water quality in Cape Cod that are different and have been recognized in all manner of regulatory programs around the wastewater side, and get those into the Department of Agriculture's regulatory program. It's a long slog.
Is there anyone who has not had a chance to ask a question, who needs to ask a question before we wrap up? The Zoom? The Zoom actually has a lot of comments, but not questions, according to Dr. Oldenburg. There's somebody who has not, Richard?
Yeah, we talked about individual things we can do. I think the other thing is the 14 towns, the select boards, Cape Cod Commission, and the council of the town of Barnstable need to get together and hear people like you speak, because the leadership is going to come from the communities themselves. But my question is, we talked about it's going to take 20 or more years to get sewerage in all these communities. In the bays and estuaries, all this dead algae that's accumulated, that's sitting down there, along with the sediment that has the phosphorus in it. Is there a way that can be removed? I mean, once the sewage comes in, you're going to prevent the algae, but how do you, the eelgrass can't grow, right? So,
and this, Rich has heard this conversation many times in the National Select Board meeting. You got to stop the insult, first and foremost. Systems will heal themselves. They will flush. If you stop adding the fuel, the systems will clean themselves up. To the extent you've got certain pockets in these areas that might need a little help, I'm sure you could do some spot, maybe you do some spot dredging, maybe you do some inlet widening, maybe you do some intervention. But first and foremost, before getting all worried about how you're going to get all that muck out of there, you got to stop the muck accumulation. If you look at the example, Boston Harbor, 1986, the country's most polluted urban harbor. Stop dumping 300 million gallons a day of poorly treated wastewater and sludge in the harbor. You've got the cleanest urban harbor in the country, and beaches that were, abandoned are now drawing people and investment and activity. You have a whole city that turned its back on the water and has actually turned itself facing the water. So the evidence is stop the insult. The resource will fix a lot of itself.
I want to thank everyone for coming, but I think Andrew will be here for just a few minutes afterwards. If you have individual questions and want to approach him, that's fine. I want to tell you also, next week we are having a sustainable landscaping presentation on native plantings, reducing pesticides and fertilizers, rain gardens, and pollinator gardens, and more. Fertilizer buffer zones and things like that. So same time, same place, next Wednesday, you're more than welcome. And I really want to thank Andrew again. He's back.